We moved to the farm because Dad said it was the only place quiet enough to hear yourself think. That was the joke he kept telling Mom while he loaded the truck with boxes. You can't hear yourself think in the city with a train line screaming behind the apartments and neighbors that fought in the hallway at 3 a.m. Here, he said, it would be the wind and the crickets and nothing else. He said it like a promise. Out here, the land keeps its own calendar. The county road turns to gravel 2 miles before our driveway, and the driveway itself is more suggestion than path. 2 strips of dirt cut through wild grass, leading to a white farmhouse and a corrugated metal barn that wrinkles the sunlight. Beyond the house, corn rises in green-gold waves, every row so straight it looks like a ruler drew it across the earth. The fields go on until the horizon gets tired. Most nights the sun drops straight into them and takes its time dying, bleeding orange and then ash. We arrived in late summer, when the stalks had shoulders and the tassels dusted the air with pollen. The heat was lazy and heavy as a quilt. The dog, Scout, made his assessment of the place the way he evaluates everything. Nose down, circle wide, ears cocked. He trotted the perimeter of the house, then sat with his chin on my knee like he needed my opinion to make his own. The house was old but not haunted looking. 2 stories, a porch that sagged like it was tired from holding secrets. The wind chimes hanging under the eaves were made of mismatched keys. Inside, the floorboards talked to us. Every step I took in the hallway spoke a syllable I almost understood. Mom said, "Old wood breathes." Dad said, "That's not breathing, that's settling." They were both smiling, the smile adults use when they're performing calm. The first night, we ate still warm pizza from town at the kitchen island. The kitchen window over the sink framed an ocean of corn, the field so close that if someone wanted to, they could reach from between the stalks and tap the glass with a thin knuckle. Wind brushed the leaves, and the sound was 1,000 quiet hands rubbing together, a soft hiss that never quite became a voice. Scout watched that window like it owed him money.
"I know what you're thinking," Dad said, catching me staring. "It's not as lonely as it looks. There's the McCrae's 3 miles north, and the Hulls over by the creek. Do they ever visit?" I asked. "Farmers don't visit," Mom said, wiping pizza grease with a paper towel. "They wave with 2 fingers from their steering wheels and pretend it counts." "We'll invite them for a barbecue," Dad said. He said it like a plan, like setting posts in concrete. After dinner, we carried the last boxes up. My room faced the field. When the wind pushed the corn, shadows skittered across my walls, long black ribbons that rose and fell, rose and fell. I taped a poster over the worst of the shifting and told myself it was fine. Everything was louder in a new house anyway. The old refrigerator dinged like a bell. The air conditioner thumped to life like a giant heart remembering to beat. Beyond that, the insects sang and sang. I lay awake a long time inventing stories about what lived in the rows. By morning, the farm had changed the rules of our days. Dad woke before the light and took the truck to the North 40, where the irrigation line had a cough he didn't like. Mom put on a straw hat and a playlist and tried to make the kitchen into something that felt like ours. Curtains, a magnet shaped like a tomato, a bright rug that made the floor look less tired. I swept the porch and tried to pretend I wanted to. I told myself I was part of some pioneer story, some brave girl and her dog and a wide world that could be taught to behave. Scout followed me, serious and thoughtful, a soldier on patrol. It didn't take long for the edges of the quiet to show. The wind is different here. In the city, wind is a thing that bullies corners. Out here it is a person you can't quite see, slipping between leaves, spinning up dust in lazy spirals, always changing its mind. It carried smells with it, too. Damp dirt, hot metal, green things cut open. And sometimes, only sometimes,
something like breath on the back of the neck. Dad said the rows were at that age where they didn't need him every minute. He said the corn was good, he could hear it in the way the leaves moved, and I pretended I knew what that meant. He started teaching me the names of machines, as if that would make me belong to them. Disc harrow, ripper, header, auger. He lifted the hood of the old tractor and put my hand on the engine block until I could feel it hum through my bones. "You don't fear what you can fix," he said. "You fear what you don't understand." I didn't tell him that the two things weren't always different. On the third evening, a truck I didn't know rolled slowly past our driveway, then reversed and eased in, tires whispering on dirt. A man with a sunburn of a face and a cap that read "Hall Farms" climbed out. He had hands like old rope. "Heard you were the new folks," he said, and we learned what passes for a welcome when your nearest neighbor is a 15-minute drive. He told Dad the groundwater here liked to run away from you and to keep an eye on the south fence because the posts liked to lean in storms. He told Mom where the grocery was that didn't overcharge for milk. "Anything else?" Dad asked, polite curiosity. The man squinted at the corn like it owed him an answer. "You'll hear things," he said finally. And for the first time since he arrived, I paid attention. Out in the rows. "Wind makes a mess in there. Carry on," he added, like for him that was a benediction. After he left, Mom laughed and said, "He means raccoons. Maybe deer. You hear something, you clap your hands and shout. They go." That night, while Dad pretended to enjoy the local news found through a fuzzy antenna, and Mom washed dishes like each one was a meditation, I sat cross-legged on the porch steps with Scout's head heavy in my lap. The moon rose like a slow coin. Every crick in the house became a word I couldn't find. Every rustle became intent. Out in the fields, the wind found a rhythm, and the corn answered, leaf speaking to leaf. Somewhere far along the row, something moved and didn't stop. A weight pushing the stalks apart, then together. Scout's ears pricked, and he made that low noise dogs make when they'd rather not escalate. "Probably a deer," I told him, just to say something. The first whisper came so faintly I thought it belonged to me. A thread of sound, the idea of a voice and no more. My name, maybe, or the shape of it. Something in the ear's blind spot. I could have ignored it, called it nerves. But I'm a dishonest person when it comes to fear. I catalog it. I asked myself where it came from. The wind came from the west. The sound came with it. The corn waved like an audience that couldn't agree. "Dad?" I called. Not loud, not like an alarm, just a question tossed over my shoulder toward the living room. He hummed an acknowledgement and turned the volume up on a human interest story about a county fair pie winner. The newscaster used the word folks too much. The second whisper slipped in under his voice, as private as breath. It formed a syllable that touched my name's middle and rolled off it. I stood. Scout didn't. He only worsened his growl by a hair and stared so hard the field seemed to stare back. It was ridiculous to feel as if the rows leaned forward. Corn doesn't lean, not that way. And yet... "Probably a deer," I said again. But this time I wanted someone to contradict me. Another thing you learn here. Sound does tricks, the way a stream does tricks with sunlight. The porch made its own nighttime song, wood and nail and chain of the swing, the far-off rumble of the semi on County 12, and the corn added harmony, and together they made space for imagination. I should have gone back in, closed the door, found a book loud enough to drown this place out.
Instead, I took one step off the porch, then another. Dog at my heel because he's made of loyalty even when he disagrees. The yard between the porch and the first row is a 20-foot buffer Dad calls the no-plant strip. He says it's for access and for fire breaks during drought. He keeps it mowed so low the grass looks shaved. The line where it ended and the corn began was too neat, a green wall. I could smell the plants, wet, green, a little metallic where the leaves had cut themselves on wind. Somewhere a cicada wound up its song and then sawed it off like something had put a finger to its mouth. I told myself to count to 3 and then go inside. 1. A leaf near my ankle moved, as if something small had brushed past. 2. The wind paused, and in the silence the field clicked, stems flexing, 1,000 tiny joints. 3. My name, clear as if someone had whispered it against the shell of my ear. Lena. I turned so fast I almost fell. The porch was empty, the screen door was closed. The kitchen's rectangles of light made innocent shapes on the lawn. When I faced the field again, everything waited for me to be the one who moved. Scout pressed himself against my leg, not trembling but taut. I put my hand on his head and felt the fur shift as his ears adjusted minutely to a sound he could isolate and I couldn't. "Hello?" I said before I could stop myself, because I was raised to be polite, and because when you're asked a question, even one you don't want, you want to be someone who answers. "Who's there?" The corn answered with corn. Leaves rasped against each other like someone turning pages too quickly. The wind returned, relieved to have an excuse. I took a step closer to the boundary. A small moth lifted from one of the tassels and fluttered in a stuttering halo around the porch light behind me, as if it couldn't remember how to want. Somewhere deep in the rows, a stalk gave a single hard knock as if struck by a palm. My name again, softer, on the exhale. Lena. The voice had no texture. It wasn't high or low, male or female. It was a shape filled with air. My syllables carried in it like weeds caught in a current. "Dad?" I tried again, louder. This time he came to the door, screen whining, one hand on the frame, eyes amused, and then quickly not. "You okay?" I swallowed. I thought I heard somebody out there. He listened, head cocked. The field pretended to be a field. 1 beat, 2. His face did that thing it does when he wants to fix and can't. The eyes go steady, the jaw sets. "It's wind," he said, and I knew he needed it to be. "This place is nothing but wind." Behind him, Mom's voice. "Everything all right?" "Raccoons and leaves," he said without turning. Then to me, lighter, almost teasing, "You'll get used to it. The quiet is loud the first week." I wanted to tell him that it wasn't the quiet I was hearing. That quiet doesn't remember your name. But we were trying not to be people who spooked at breeze. We were trying to be a family that could belong to a big sky. Inside, dishes dried to the sound of Dad explaining soil depth and tomorrow's plan for checking the fence line. The windows reflected us as a ghost family floating among the rows. When I carried the cups to the cabinet, I paused at the kitchen sink. The night waited on the other side of the glass. It was something you could touch. In my room, the shadows had learned new choreography. They slid across the walls as the stalks nodded. I opened the window to let in air and got more than I asked for. The smell of green and dirt and something like breath again. And under it,
a thread barely there, of whispering that knew where my bed was. Scout lay across my doorway like a guard who'd decided doors were a lie. I told myself a story to fall asleep, that loud is safe, that names cannot harm you when they don't mean you. I counted feigned explanations like sheep, wood settling, wind speaking plant, distance throwing its voice, neighbors testing us. I promised myself that by morning it would be funny. I promised myself that this was the kind of fear you could sweep off a porch. At some small hour, I woke from a dream I couldn't hold on to, the kind that leaves the shape of itself, but not the picture. The house was so quiet I could hear the clock in the hallway eating seconds, and the corn, like rain without the wet, and soft enough that if I'd been braver I would have said it wasn't there at all. The outline of my name, my very own, breathed from the black where the rose began. The next few days I told myself I had imagined it. New houses creak, new land talks. Maybe I had fallen asleep on the porch and dreamed the sound of my name. I kept repeating that to myself like a prayer. But Scout didn't buy it. He refused the field after that night. He'd patrol the porch, the barn, even trot down the gravel driveway to the mailbox with Dad. But when the wind blew across the corn and bent the rows, he'd tuck his tail and whimper. He wouldn't cross the bare strip of mowed grass, wouldn't so much as sniff the first stalk. And dogs know things. Dad tried to laugh it off. "Guess he doesn't like bugs," he said. But his eyes followed the field too, longer than they should have, like he was measuring something that didn't add up. It was the following Thursday when Mom heard it too. She had been folding laundry in the living room when I heard her call up the stairs, sharp and startled. "Frank?" That was Dad's name. She stood frozen in the doorway with a sheet half folded in her hands. "Thought you were outside," she said when Dad came in from the barn. "I swear I heard you ask me to bring you the hammer." "I didn't," he said, already frowning. "You didn't shout from the field?" "No, Maggie. I've been in the barn for an hour." They looked at each other too long. Mom finally forced a smile, said maybe it was the TV left on upstairs. But I knew it wasn't. There was no TV upstairs. And she knew it too. That night, the whispering returned. Only this time it wasn't soft or shapeless. It was my mother's voice. She was asleep 2 rooms over, but I heard her as plain as if she'd leaned into my doorway. "Lena, come outside, sweetheart. Just for a minute." I sat upright, my heart slamming like a hammer on nails. I listened. The voice came again, but from outside the window this time, low and coaxing. "Come here, honey. Just a minute in the corn. I need you." Scout's growl woke next. He stood stiff at the foot of the bed, his teeth bare, throat vibrating like a motor. I didn't move until the voice faded, blending back into the wind. When morning came, Mom swore she'd never called me, never left her bed. That was the night Dad decided to take it seriously. He loaded his old 12-gauge, slung it across his back, and walked the edge of the fields with a flashlight. I followed at a distance, Scout glued to my leg. The beam of his light carved tunnels through the corn, the leaves rattling and clacking as if annoyed to be disturbed. "Probably pranksters," he muttered. "Kids from town. They think it's funny." But there was no one there. The rose swallowed his light whole, and the shadows seemed to lean inward, thick and endless. The sound of the corn was louder than the crickets, louder than the frogs down by the creek. A restless, ceaseless rustling, like words just below hearing. After an hour, Dad returned to the porch, jaw tight. "If they want to play games, they'll get a surprise." He patted the shotgun, but the gesture didn't comfort me. He hadn't seen anyone, and that was the part that scared him most. The next evening, I tried coaxing Scout into the first row with me, just one step. I held a stick and threw it toward the edge of the corn. He didn't chase it, didn't even look. He sat back on his haunches and whined, eyes locked on the field as if begging me not to. When I tugged his collar to guide him forward, he snapped, not at me but at the air, jaws clamping at nothing. That was enough. I dropped the leash and backed away. He stood between me and the corn all night after that, panting, pacing, always facing the rows. A storm rolled in on Saturday, the kind that makes the whole house tremble, with lightning that turns night to day for an instant before everything crashes back into black. That was the night the whispers grew bold. The voices came from all sides, surrounding the house. Not one voice anymore, many. Some calling softly, some laughing, some sobbing. I swear I heard Dad's father, dead 15 years, calling his name from the dark. I swear I heard my own voice, answering. The windows shook under invisible hands. Mom pressed her palms to her ears and prayed under her breath. Dad stood in the middle of the living room with the shotgun like a soldier, surrounded. Every time thunder boomed, the voices swelled louder, riding the storm, filling the walls with their begging. Let us in. Just a minute, please, we're so cold. Lightning lit the fields and I saw shadows among the stalks. Dozens, maybe more, standing still as scarecrows, all facing the house. Their mouths didn't move, but the voices poured in anyway. When the storm finally passed, silence pressed in like a weight. The whispers retreated with the rain. But the silence didn't feel safe. It felt like waiting. At dawn, the field looked different. We walked out to the edge, half expecting to find footprints, pranksters' trash, or at least broken stalks. But there was nothing. Nothing except one detail we all saw, but none of us spoke about at first. The corn looked closer. The no-plant strip, the 20 feet of bare grass Dad always kept mowed between the yard and the first row, was narrower now. Maybe only 15 feet, maybe 10. The stalks were taller too, leaves hanging low, tassels brushing one another as if whispering secrets we weren't meant to hear. Mom turned back toward the house, pale, muttering, "It's just the light. Just shadows. It hasn't changed." But I knew she was lying. We all did. By the end of the first week, nobody was sleeping much. Mom had purple bruises under her eyes. Dad carried the shotgun like it was a second spine, and Scout wouldn't stop pacing at the windows. The voices hadn't come every night, but when they did, they drained us like fever dreams. The strangest part was how ordinary the mornings looked. Birds sang, sunlight poured across the fields, and the air smelled of cut hay and warm earth. If not for the dark crescents under our eyes, we could have been any other family starting out on the farm. But we all noticed the same thing, without saying it at first. The corn was closer. The no-plant strip that once gave us breathing room had thinned to a few strides. Dad argued with himself out loud about it, measuring with his boots, stomping lines in the dirt. "Not possible," he muttered, jaw clenched. "You can't just move a row overnight." But the stalks didn't care about his denial. They leaned heavy toward the house, their leaves brushing against the air as if reaching. On the 8th day, Dad dragged out the mower. He worked the whole morning, cutting the encroaching rows back, hacking them into stubs. I watched him from the porch, sweat darkening his shirt, the engine roaring, stalks falling in waves.
When he was done, he wiped his forehead and looked proud, as if he'd wrestled chaos into order. "There," he said, panting. "That'll teach it. Land's got boundaries, and it's gonna remember them." But the next morning the corn was back, not just regrown, but thicker, taller. Every stalk cut down had returned, green and defiant, as if it had never been touched. Dad stood there staring at the rows, mower still parked where he'd left it, hands balled into fists. "It's not possible," he kept saying. "It's not damn possible." Mom didn't argue. She just folded her arms across her chest, rocking on her heels like she was cold. That night, the voices returned, louder, sharper. They didn't whisper anymore, they screamed. We were eating dinner when the first one came, a wail that sounded like a child in the corn pleading for help. Mom dropped her fork and clutched her chest. "Frank," she whispered. Dad grabbed the shotgun and stormed to the porch, but the cries only multiplied. Voices of men, women, children, all mixed together in a chorus of pain. Some called our names. Some just screamed like animals being slaughtered. The sound pressed against the house, filled every wall, every window. Scout howled and clawed at the back door, desperate to dig his way inside the floor. I sat with my hands over my ears, rocking back and forth. But I still heard it. Clearer. Closer. The voices weren't outside anymore. They were seeping in through the walls, the vents, the cracks in the wood. By midnight, Mom was sobbing. Dad was shouting at shadows. And I swore the ceiling itself was whispering in a voice that sounded like mine. And then, as suddenly as it began, the sound died. The silence that followed was worse. The next day I begged Dad not to go near the corn, but he did. He walked the boundary with his shotgun, daring something to move. I followed far behind, not wanting to, but unable to let him vanish alone. The sun was bright, the air too hot, the cicadas buzzing loud enough to make the world swim. At the edge of the rows, I stopped. Scout pressed himself to my side, whining, refusing to step farther. That was when I saw them. Figures between the stalks. Not clear, not detailed, just shapes. Tall, thin, unmoving. Watching. I blinked and they seemed gone, swallowed by green. But when I looked again, there they were. Always in the corner of vision, never straight on. "Dad," I whispered, but he didn't hear me. He was too busy muttering, "I'll burn it. I'll burn the whole damn field if I have to." When I told Mom what I'd seen, she hushed me quick, pressing a trembling finger to her lips. "Don't talk about them," she said. "If you don't talk about them, maybe they won't notice you." But they already had. By the end of the second week, the corn touched the porch. The stalks had leaned so close that the leaves brushed against the railing. That night, we heard them scraping the wood, tapping the siding. The house no longer felt separate. It was being absorbed, swallowed by green. The whispers came earlier now, starting at dusk and carrying through until dawn. Sometimes it was my name, sometimes Dad's, sometimes a stranger's. One night, I saw Mom standing at the window, her face pale, lips moving. I crept closer and realized she was whispering back, answering the voices. I tugged her arm, panicked, and she startled like she'd been caught sleepwalking. "I didn't mean to," she whispered. "It just sounded so sad." The worst came on the third Sunday. My brother, little Tommy, only 10, had been quiet all week, keeping to himself, sketching in a notebook.
That night he dropped the pencil and looked at me with wide, terrified eyes. "They're calling me," he said. "Who?" I asked, even though I knew. "The people in the corn. They said I could come play." Before I could answer, he pointed at the window, and I swear I saw it too. Small shapes standing just beyond the glass. Children, pale and unmoving, watching with wide, black eyes. When I blinked, they were gone, but the sound of their laughter lingered, faint and dry as rustling leaves. That night, none of us spoke. We just sat in the living room with every light on, the corn pressing against the house, the voices circling like wolves. And all I could think was this: we were running out of room. The night Dad decided to prove the field wrong, the sky had that deep-set, bruised color that never quite turns to black. Heat lightning bloomed along the far horizon, a pulse with no thunder. The corn had crept right up to the bottom stair of the porch by then, so close the leaves brushed our ankles when we opened the door. Dad had moved a chair onto the top step and set the shotgun across his lap. A thermos of coffee sat on the rail. The old mag light waited on the floorboards like a silver club. "We're not being hunted," he said, as much to himself as to us. "We're being messed with." Mom hovered inside the screen door, hands wrapped around a dish towel like she was strangling a snake. "Frank, come in when you hear anything and call the sheriff." "Please." "The sheriff can't arrest the wind." He looked at me and tried a smile I'd seen him practice in mirrors before interviews. "Go on to bed, kiddo. First good night's sleep in a week if we do this right." I didn't argue. Part of me wanted to see him win. Part of me wanted to shut my door, crawl under the covers, and pretend the house still had edges. I lay down fully dressed. The first hour, the corn only talked to itself, leaf against leaf, stalk clicking softly as it settled. Scout curled under my window with his nose to the gap, breathing quick and shallow, eyes two dim coins in the dark. The house made its nighttime list of complaints. I listened until each sound had an explanation. Then, just as I started to drift, the whispering pinched my name like a candle wick. "Lena." I froze. It wasn't shapeless anymore. It had learned the curve of my syllables, the small, embarrassed fall of the last vowel. A breath later, another voice. "Maggie." Mom's name, carefully offered, like a hand held out to help her up. Then, softer, a thread pulled tight. "Tommy." I swung my legs out of bed and stepped over Scout. He followed close, pressing into my calves as if to slow me. In the hall, the clock's second hand scraped at time. Mom stood at the window that faced the porch, one palm against the glass, the other against her mouth. She didn't turn when I came to stand beside her. Outside, Dad's shape was a dark block in the chair, the shotgun a line of shadow across his lap. He hadn't moved. The corn spoke the way a crowd murmurs before a speech. Then one voice stepped forward, too familiar to be anything but cruel. "Frank," it called from the edge of the rows, just 6 feet from the bottom step. "Franklin, boy, you forget your fence posts lean south when the water's high." My father's breath hitch was small, but it carried. Mom's shoulders tightened. The voice was grainy and warm as gravel warmed by sun. It was my grandfather's voice, the one that smoked cheap cigars and called Dad Franklin boy, even when he was 40, alive in a field he'd been buried far from 15 years ago. "Dad?" My father's own voice sounded like a man who'd bitten his cheek. "That you?" "It's cold out here, son," the voice said, gentle, conversational. "You leave an old man at the edge of the field? Come see me." Mom made the smallest sound. "Don't," she whispered, but it fogged against the window and went nowhere. My father didn't look back. He set the thermos upright, took the mag light in one hand, and stood. He didn't take the shotgun. He took the stairs like they were a test. First step. Second. On the third, the corn leaned in, leaves brushing his jeans. He didn't flinch. "Where are you?" he said. The light walked the first row, wrinkling shadows. He paused at the boundary where yard became field. For a breath, he looked exactly like himself, shoulders square, jaw set, a man adding columns in his head and finding the sum believable. Then the voice sighed. "Deeper," it said. "Don't keep me waiting." He stepped into the corn. The sound changed when he crossed. From the yard, the field had always sounded like 1,000 small things. Inside, it sounded like one big thing speaking all at once. The leaves tightened their chatter into something almost like words. The stalks clicked in quick sequence like knuckles popping down a spine. The light from Dad's flashlight bobbed and then thinned and then disappeared, eaten by green. Mom shoved the screen door open and made it to the top step before Scout lunged and blocked her. He didn't bark. He planted both paws on her shins and shook his head side to side with a force I'd never seen from him. She staggered back, caught herself on the rail. I grabbed her arm. "Please," I said, and wasn't sure who I was talking to. From the rows, my grandfather's voice talked to my father the way he used to when they were fixing fences. "How's that post? Good and tight? Watch your step, the ground's soft there. You know your daughter breaks her eggs when she gets in a hurry." It laced in details it should not have known. Then other voices joined, thinner and sweeter. A child's, a woman's, familiar, unfamiliar, overlapping like wind chimes in heavy air. They said his name, each a slightly different shape. They said sorry and help and come closer and there you are, there you are. We waited like people wait for verdicts. Time stretched thin. After a while, Mom started whispering prayers out loud and then stopped, as if something had turned its face toward the sound. I cupped my hands around my eyes and pressed my forehead to the glass so the outside would take up the whole world. All I saw was the outermost row bowing and straightening, as if someone were breathing just beyond it. Minutes passed, or an hour, or none. Then the flashlight appeared, a pale pulse deep in the rows. It grew brighter, nearer, and my father stepped back into the strip of lawn as if the field had moved him forward rather than he moved himself out. He stopped at the edge. He didn't cross. The skin around his eyes looked loose, as if his face didn't fit right. The mag light dangled from 2 fingers, swinging a slow idiot pendulum. He was muttering. His lips moved around shapes that wouldn't come together. "Frank," Mom said, and the porch spat her name back at her in its own voice, a hinge squeak, a plank sigh. She lowered her hands. Her voice found its strength. "Frank, come here." He stepped forward, 1 foot into the strip. The corn flexed as if to keep him. He startled, then blinked hard and took the last 2 steps to the porch. Mom was off the top stair before Scout could reach her. She grabbed Dad's wrists and then his face like she needed to confirm there were bones under the skin. "What did you hear?" she asked. He shook his head too quickly, like a bug trying to shake off water. "All around," he said. "All around," and he stopped. What lived in his eyes in that moment wasn't fear or sorrow. It was embarrassment. "It's fine," he said. "I'm fine." He said it the way men talk around a wound that needs stitches. When he sat, the chair creaked like an animal relieved to be empty. He put the flashlight on the rail, hands resting on his knees, and stared at nothing. Mom tugged the screen open for him, ushered him inside the way she had when he came home from long shifts and fell asleep in doorways. I followed, Scout backing through the gap, never turning his spine to the field. In the kitchen light, Dad looked older by years. Something faint and dusty clung to his clothes, a smell like corn soak crushed in a fist and left to sour. He took a breath that stuttered. "It knew things," he said, barely moving his mouth. Dad's voice, yes, but other things. He swallowed and the tendons in his neck jumped. "I heard you all in there," he said to Mom, to me, to the house. "Heard you like you were lost. Heard you like you were." He stopped again, and his face did something small and terrible. "Hungry." Mom touched his cheek. "You're here," she said. "Stay here. That's all." He nodded, but his eyes kept slipping past her toward the window, the glass black as if it had forgotten how to be a window and had become a door instead. The rest of that night didn't end, it just got thinner. Around 2, the whispers found new doors. They came through the heating vents, stuttering as the fan turned on and off, syllables chopped and carried and reassembled wrong. They came through the drain in the kitchen sink in a fizzing rush, like someone speaking with their mouth full of water. They bled through the seams where the baseboards didn't quite meet the floor and rode the hairline cracks in the drywall like ants. Everywhere we put our ears, there the house breathed words that sounded like ours. Tommy woke sobbing and wouldn't let go of my hand. His palm was wet and small, bones like bird legs. "They were under my bed," he said, hiccuping the words. "They were whispering in the rug. They told me there's a door in the closet if I knock 3 times. "There isn't," I said, with a certainty I didn't own. "There isn't any door." I led him to the living room where we'd started sleeping in a tangle of blankets like refugees from our own rooms. Mom laid him on the couch and sat on the floor beside him, her hand on his shin, squeezing rhythmically the way you do for toddlers in car seats. Dad paced, then stopped pacing and stared at the front door like he could keep it closed by looking at it hard enough. Around 3, the lights started to misbehave. Not the flicker of a bad bulb, the slow dimming of something considering its options. The living room lamp sighed down to a dull orange, then swelled back to white, then dipped again, tidal. The kitchen light stayed bright but hummed, a high insectile sound that made my fillings ache. On the second swell, the porch light clicked on by itself. Through the window, a dozen pale ovals gleamed in the outer row, reflecting the light back. Eyes or leaves, I couldn't tell. Scout moved to the front door and planted himself, head low, rump high, a herding stance he'd never used on anything but cows. His hackles ran from skull to tail. The fur so raised he looked 2 sizes larger. He did not bark. He did something worse. He whined a question with his whole body. Must we stay? The radio on the kitchen shelf, the old one Mom bought from a thrift store with a big round dial, coughed into life even though no one had touched it. Static first, fat and furry. Then a station slid into place, too perfect to be an accident. A song tinny with distance played for 3 exact seconds. And then a voice spoke over it, a voice that was mine and wasn't mine. "Lena," it said, almost bored, "pick up." Mom slapped the off button. The radio stayed on. Dad pulled the plug. The radio stayed on. He turned it face down like a punished child. The static returned to a steady hiss, as comforting as a long sigh if you were the kind of person who found snakes comforting. We did not speak after that. We listened. The house listened back. The whispers changed with our silence, taking on our shapes. They practiced our rhythms until I could not tell where I ended and they began. Toward the thin edge of morning, when the world has decided to start over but hasn't told the birds yet, a new sound entered the house. 3 slow knocks, not on the front door, not on any door, from inside the wall. 1, 2, 3. A pause. Then again, and again. It was a patient sound, the sound of someone who does not believe in being denied. "Don't answer," Mom said, and then laughed, choked, brittle. "I don't even know what that would mean." Dad went to the wall. He pressed his ear to it, then his palm, eyes closed like he was praying to drywall. "It's in the studs," he said, and the way he said it made my stomach turn, as if the house were a rib cage and something knocked from inside the lungs. He went to the garage and came back with a hammer and a flat bar, the kind you use to gentle nails out of wood without splitting it. "No," Mom said, but he'd already slid the bar into the seam of the baseboard. He pried. The nail squealed. The board came away with an old sigh. The dark space behind gaped open, smelling of dust and forgotten spills. For a heartbeat, nothing. Then, air moved. Not wind. Air. Like breath. It wet my face like the inside of someone's palm. And in it, a voice so small I wondered if I'd imagined it. A child's voice whispering the shape of a giggle. Dad dropped the bar. It hit his boot and bounced. He slapped the board back into place with both hands, shoving it home like he could stuff the night back through the hole. He hammered in 2 nails, not where the original holes were, but wherever his hands landed, ugly silver heads flashing in the dim. He pressed his forehead to the wood. He had started to shake. We made it to sunrise by inches. The light came reluctant, and then, all at once, peeling the night off the house. The corn didn't retreat the way it had other mornings. It just stood there, touching the bottom stair, leaves shiny with dew, as if waiting for us to say, "Thank you for letting us have the day." Dad went out into that gray gold and ran a finger along the cuticle of the closest leaf like a dare. It sliced him, clean and thin. He stared at the bead of blood as if it were proof of something either way. "We're leaving," he said, not loud, not to us, to the decision itself. Mom flinched like someone had snapped a rubber band against her wrist. "We can't just... Frank, the bank..." "We're leaving," he repeated, eyes on the field. "Pack bags. We'll go to the halls, or into town. I don't care. We'll come back with the sheriff and a bulldozer and a..." He stopped because the corn rustled with a private laughter, a sound that found the hinge between words and leaves. "Today," he said, and turned his back on it, as if that were an act of courage and not blasphemy. By noon we had bags by the door. The radio was unplugged and wrapped in a towel under the sink. We had avoided mirrors. We had avoided saying names. We had avoided windows as if glass were thin ice. The house felt like a mouth about to speak a truth you don't want. At 1, the voices came at full day for the first time. Not from field or vent or wall, through the open emptiness of the rooms. They spoke like people entering a church, soft and excited, with the certainty that they belong. "We're here," they said, as if we had invited them, as if this were their address of record. And in that moment I knew, with the terrible clarity you sometimes get right before accidents, that leaving would not be as simple as legs and a door. The corn had not surrounded us to keep itself out. It had come close to be near enough to listen, to learn, to lean into the places we couldn't help but open. When the afternoon wind picked up, the outer leaves ticked against the siding in a rhythm I could not ignore.
1, 2, 3. Pause. 1, 2. It sounded like knocking and like a heartbeat, and like a word I didn't know how to say. Dad stood in the doorway with the duffel over his shoulder, testing the weight of the choice. Mom squeezed Tommy's hand until he yelped and then apologized and didn't let go. Scout stared at the gap between door and jamb, nostrils flaring, waiting for the air itself to step through. Somewhere beyond the porch, down in the rows where the ground always looks softer than it is, a voice shaped like my own said, clear as a bell, "Open up!" We never made it to the truck. Dad stood there with the duffel over his shoulder, jaw tight, one hand on the knob, and the corn decided for us. The first voice came at 3 in the afternoon, clear and conversational from the living room wall. It was my grandmother's voice, dead before I was born, but I recognized it from the few cassette tapes Mom kept hidden in the attic. Warm, gentle, impossibly calm. "Frankie," she said, "don't leave. Supper's almost ready." Dad froze. His lips moved like he was mouthing the taste of her name. Then another voice joined in, low and broken, a man's drawl. "Franklin, boy, you'll hurt yourself out there." His father again. And then came the rest. The voices swelled all at once, a chorus spilling out from the vents, the light fixtures, the walls themselves. They spoke in harmony, in laughter, in sobs. Some sounded like us, some sounded like neighbors, some were strangers. All of them spoke with a terrible intimacy, the way only family talks, every syllable slipping into our ears like secrets. Mom pulled Tommy close, covered his ears, but he was still shaking, still mouthing words he shouldn't have known. His lips shaped, "Play with us, play with us," though his own voice never left his throat. By sundown, the corn had leaned hard enough that stalks pressed against the windows, shadows stretching across the walls. The kitchen light flickered, then dimmed to a dull orange, painting us all in sickly glow. Dad loaded the shotgun, pumped it once and said, "We stay awake. We don't answer. We wait for morning. That's it." But none of us believed morning would come. It started with the windows. Soft at first, a tapping like rain. Then harder, knuckles, fingers drumming on glass, from every side of the house. "Let us in," the voices begged. "It's so cold out here." Then came the door. 3 steady knocks. Then 5. Then fists pounding, shaking the frame. Scout planted himself in front of it, snarling, hackles high, foam flecking his muzzle. He wasn't the kind of dog that barked at storms, but this was no storm. I pressed myself into the corner, clutching Tommy's hand. Mom whispered prayers, louder each time the house shook until the words themselves seemed to turn sour in her mouth. She stopped, eyes wide, as if the whispers were praying back at her. From the corn, shapes began to gather. I saw them through the living room window, pale figures standing among the stalks, dozens of them, their faces shadowed, their bodies still as statues. They didn't move, didn't sway with the wind, but the corn bent around them, bowed toward them like worshippers. And then their mouths opened, but the whispers didn't come from their lips. They poured from the walls, the floors, the ceiling. The house was their throat. Dad fired the shotgun through the front door. The blast shook the house, rattled the pictures from the walls. For a heartbeat, the whispers stopped. The silence was so sudden it hurt my ears. Then, laughter. High, shrill, endless laughter,
echoing through the house, mocking, hungry. The door frame splintered, not from the shot, but from pressure outside. Wood cracked, hinges groaned. The house was breathing in. Dad fired again, this time into the window. Glass exploded outward, and for a moment I saw them clearly, the figures in the corn. Dozens, maybe hundreds. Thin, pale, wrong. Their eyes reflected the porch light like animals, but their faces were ours. My mother's face, my brother's, even mine. Dozens of duplicates, mouths closed, eyes staring. Dad stumbled back, dropped the shotgun, and whispered, "They're us." The corn pressed harder. Leaves scraped against the siding like knives. The voices grew unbearable, all speaking at once, filling every inch of air. "Let us in. Join us. We miss you. We're so lonely. Don't leave." Mom clutched Tommy to her chest, sobbing into his hair. Scout hurled himself at the window, barking until his throat bled. I pressed my palms to my ears, but it didn't matter. The voices weren't in my ears anymore. They were inside my head. I heard myself speaking, though my mouth was shut. A voice, shaped like mine, whispering, "Just open the door. Just one step into the corn. It's not so bad. It's where you belong." The front door shuddered, then burst inward. Not off the hinges, not splintered to pieces. It opened, slowly, quietly, as if someone on the other side had simply turned the knob. And beyond it, rows of corn, endless, stretching into darkness. Not the yard, not the porch, just corn, right there, swallowing the threshold. The voices fell silent all at once. The air was heavy, waiting. Mom took one step back, clutching Tommy. Dad reached for her, but something in his eyes was already gone. Dazed, empty. And then the figures moved. They stepped out from the corn in perfect unison, dozens of them. Faces blank and pale, each one a reflection of us. A copy of Mom, holding a child that looked like Tommy. A copy of Dad, shotgun in hand. A copy of me, eyes wide, lips parted in a whisper. Scout launched himself at them, teeth bared, but the moment he touched the first figure, he went silent, just gone, like he'd been swallowed into the stalks. No sound, no trace. Mom screamed. Dad grabbed the shotgun again, raised it, but the figures only smiled with our faces. The sound of rustling filled the house, louder than a storm, louder than fire, louder than anything I'd ever heard. And then, silence. When morning came, the house stood quiet, the porch empty, the windows broken but still. Inside, dishes sat half-washed in the sink. A duffel bag waited by the door. Blankets were scattered across the living room floor, but the family was gone. No sign of struggle, no footprints. Only stalks of corn pressing against the walls, roots pushing through cracks in the floorboards, leaves brushing the furniture as if caressing it. And if you stood very still, you could hear it. Not the wind, not the creak of old wood. Whispering. Dozens of voices. Laughing. Pleading. Calling names that didn't belong to you. Waiting for someone to answer. So, tell me, if you heard voices calling your name from the cornfields outside your home, would you answer? The family on that farm never made it to morning. Their dishes were left on the counter, their bags packed by the door. But their whispers still linger in the walls. Some say if you drive past that stretch of land on a quiet night, roll your windows down and kill the engine, you can still hear them calling. Their voices bleed through the rows, begging you to step closer, maybe even using your own voice. And if you listen too long, if you let them sound just a little too familiar, you might not come back either. If this story chilled you, don't forget to like this video, subscribe, and hit the bell so you never miss another nightmarish tale here on Campfire Horror Stories. It helps more than you know. And remember, when the corn starts whispering your name, don't answer back.